She thought it was just another patient, another shift, until one unexpected kiss changed everything. The night was long, heavy, and quiet in the way only hospitals could be at 2 in the morning. The hum of machines, the faint shuffle of nurses' shoes, the low murmurs at the reception, it was all part of May Andrews' world. She had worked the night shift for almost 4 years at St. Vincent Hospital, and she'd long accepted that the night was her companion. She liked the stillness. It gave her less room to think, less room to feel. Her job was simple: care for the sick, follow procedures, keep her heart out of it. Feelings complicated things, and May had already lived through enough complications to know that love and loss were often the same coin flipped by fate. She didn't plan to flip it again, but fate didn't need permission. Around 2:15 a.m., the emergency doors burst open, and 2 paramedics rushed in a stretcher. The man on it was pale, blood seeping through the bandages wrapped hastily around his arm and shoulder. His face was bruised, his shirt torn, his pulse weak but steady. Male, early 30s. Car accident. Lost a lot of blood but still conscious on the way here, one paramedic reported as they moved him toward Trauma Bay 3. May's instincts kicked in immediately. She grabbed gloves, helped the doctor set up, checked the vitals, cleaned the blood that trailed down his neck. He groaned once, his jaw tightening in pain. She heard the doctor say his name, Tate Woods. She didn't know it then, but that name would echo in her mind long after her shift ended. "Let's get him stable," she said, more to herself than anyone else. Hours passed in a blur of sutures for lines and quiet commands. When the chaos finally eased, Tate was sedated and resting, his breathing steady under the soft glow of the monitors. May stood by his bedside, studying him for a moment longer than she should have. There was something about him, maybe the faint lines around his eyes that suggested he'd laughed a lot once, or the tension in his jaw that said he hadn't laughed in a long time. She told herself it was curiosity, nothing more. Nurses were supposed to observe, after all. The next morning, when May returned for her second shift, she found Tate awake and angry. "Where am I?" he demanded, his voice rough, eyes darting across the sterile white room. "St. Vincent Hospital," she said calmly, adjusting his drip. "You had an accident, but you're going to be okay." He let out a humorless laugh. "Okay, you don't even know me." "You're right," May replied evenly, "but it's my job to make sure you're fine. That's all that matters right now." He turned his face away, refusing to look at her. May didn't take it personally. Some patients came in broken in ways no medicine could fix. She'd learned that healing wasn't always physical. Sometimes it was the soul that needed mending. Still, there was a tension about Tate that unsettled her. He wasn't just angry. He was haunted. Over the next few days, his mood didn't improve. He refused visitors, pushed away nurses, and barely spoke during checkups. But whenever May entered the room, something shifted. He wouldn't say much, but he'd watch her quietly, curiously. Once, when she changed the dressing on his shoulder, he flinched. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to," she said softly, focusing on her work. "But pain gets worse when you bottle it up." "You talk too much," he muttered. "Part of the job description," she replied with a faint smile. He almost smiled back, but it faded before it could form. May noticed, but she didn't push. She'd seen that kind of grief before, the kind that sinks its claws into people and convinces them they don't deserve to heal. On the 5th day, she found him sitting up for the first time, staring out the window. His chart showed improvement, though his spirit still looked fractured. "You're recovering fast," she said as she checked his vitals. "Good genes or good nurse?" "Neither," he said dryly. "Just stubbornness." May chuckled softly. "Stubbornness saves lives sometimes." "Not hers," he murmured under his breath. May froze. "Whose?" she asked gently. He hesitated, eyes darkening. "My fiancée." She was in the car, too. The words came out heavy, almost strangled. "I was driving. She died instantly." May's heart ached, but she didn't speak. Sometimes silence was the best comfort. Tate looked down, his fingers trembling slightly. "Everyone keeps saying I'm lucky to be alive. But how lucky can you be when the person you loved most isn't?" May took a breath, forcing her voice to stay steady. "You survived for a reason, Tate. Maybe not one you understand yet, but it's there. He looked at her then, really looked, and for a moment, the anger in his eyes softened into something else. You talk like someone who's lost before. She met his gaze, calm and unwavering. I have. After that, things changed between them. Their conversations became longer, lighter. Tate would tease her about her strict routines. She'd tease him about his stubborn pride. He began to eat properly again, to walk short distances down the corridor. May pretended not to notice how her heart lifted each time he smiled. A rare, fleeting sight that made the sterile hospital room feel warmer. One night, near the end of her shift, she found him awake, watching the rain outside. "You should be resting," she said, setting down a tray of tea. "Can't sleep," he replied. "Storms make me remember things." She hesitated before sitting beside him, just for a minute. "When I was 16, she began quietly, my mom got sick. I stayed up for nights listening to the machines beep, hoping she'd wake up. She never did. I hate storms too." Tate turned to her, surprised. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because," she said with a faint smile, "you're not the only one who remembers things they wish they could forget." They sat in silence, the sound of rain filling the spaces between their words. For the first time, there was no patient and nurse, no distance, just two people sharing the weight of memories. Later that night, the hospital lights flickered as thunder rolled outside. A brief power cut plunged the corridor into shadow. May hurried to check on Tate, finding him breathing fast, his hand gripping the bedsheet. "Tate, it's just a power surge," she said, touching his arm. "You're okay." "I saw the headlights," he gasped, eyes unfocused. I couldn't save her." May didn't think. She just reached out, holding his trembling hand. "You're safe," she whispered. "You did your best. You're here. Breathe with me." Slowly, his breathing steadied, his hand still clutching hers. When he finally opened his eyes, there was something different in them. Raw, vulnerable, searching. She should have pulled away. She didn't. The silence between them thickened, heavy and unspoken. Then it happened, one brief, trembling moment where the world outside ceased to exist. His lips brushed hers, hesitant, questioning, and she didn't move. The kiss was soft, almost fleeting, but it carried every unsaid word, every shared pain, every wall they both had built for years. When she finally pulled back, breathless and stunned, her mind screamed what her heart refused to hear. "This is wrong." Tate looked at her as if he'd just remembered what it meant to feel alive. "May," he began, but she shook her head, stepping back. "You need rest," she said quickly, voice trembling. "I'll send another nurse in the morning." She left before he could speak again, her pulse thundering in her chest. Alone in the corridor, May leaned against the wall, tears burning her eyes. It was just one moment, one kiss, but it shattered the promise she'd made to herself. Never fall for a patient. Never cross that line. But deep inside, something told her that line had already disappeared the moment she looked into Tate Wood's eyes. And no matter how hard she tried to fight it, she knew the truth she couldn't escape. One kiss had already changed everything. May didn't sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him, Tate Woods, the patient she'd sworn to care for and never get close to. The memory of his lips on hers replayed again and again, like a scene she wanted to forget but couldn't. It wasn't supposed to happen. She was a nurse. He was her patient. The rules were clear. Boundaries kept hearts safe. She'd built her entire life around them. But that kiss had burned through her walls like fire through paper, leaving nothing but confusion in its wake. By morning, she'd made up her mind. She'd stay away. Tate would recover soon enough, and then their paths would never cross again. It sounded simple, but nothing about Tate Woods was ever simple. When May walked into the ward the next day, she felt his gaze before she even looked up. He was sitting by the window again, sunlight washing over the faint scars on his face. He looked better, physically at least, but his expression when he saw her was unreadable. "Morning," she said briefly, keeping her tone professional. "How's the pain?" "Manageable," he replied. His voice was calm, steady, but his eyes searched hers for something she wasn't offering. She wrote notes on his chart without meeting his gaze. Dr. Kellen will review your progress this afternoon. Looks like you'll be up and walking again soon. And you? He asked suddenly. You avoiding me now? May froze. Her pen slipped slightly, and she took a breath. I'm just doing my job, Mr. Woods. Mr. Woods? He repeated, his lips curving into a bitter half-smile. That's new. It's what's appropriate, she said quickly. We both crossed the line. It won't happen again. Tate leaned back against the pillows, eyes narrowing slightly. You think I don't know that? I didn't plan for it either, May. The way he said her name made something inside her twist painfully. She wanted to leave, to escape the weight of his voice, but her feet stayed rooted. It was a mistake, she whispered finally. We both forgot where we were. Maybe, he said softly, or maybe it's the first time I've remembered I'm still alive. May's heart clenched. She couldn't do this. Not here, not now. Without another word, she turned and walked out. The door closed quietly behind her, but the silence it left behind screamed louder than any words could. For the next 3 days, May avoided Tate's ward completely. She swapped shifts, handled other patients, busied herself with paperwork and endless rounds. But every night, she felt the same ache, the hollow space where their connection used to breathe. She'd find herself passing by his door, just for a second, only to stop herself. Her colleagues began to notice. Everything okay? Nurse Lena asked one afternoon, as May absent-mindedly refilled a tray of medications. You've been quiet lately. May forced a smile. Just tired. But even she didn't believe it. One evening, just before her shift ended, Dr. Kellen stopped her in the hallway. Andrews, Mr. Woods keeps asking for you. Refuses his physiotherapy unless you're there. May's stomach tightened. He what? I know he's difficult, Kellen sighed. But you're the only one who seems to get through to him. Just talk to him, will you? May nodded reluctantly. When she entered Tate's room later that night, she expected anger or frustration. Instead, he looked defeated. His eyes were tired, his hair messy, his spirit dim. You're back, he said quietly. I didn't think you would be. May hesitated near the door. You need to stop refusing treatment. I needed to see you, he replied, his tone low, honest. Everyone else treats me like glass. You don't. She tried to ignore the pull in her chest. Because I'm your nurse. Because you care, he said, cutting in. Don't deny it. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. May looked away, focusing on the foreline instead. Tate, what happened between us can't happen again. It's not right. Maybe not, he murmured. But it's real. She closed her eyes for a moment, steadying her breath. You're confusing gratitude with feelings. You've been through trauma. That kiss, it doesn't mean what you think it does. He gave a humorless laugh. You think I don't know the difference between gratitude and wanting someone? Stop, she said softly, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her. You need to rest. What about you? He asked, his tone gentler now. When do you rest, May? When do you let anyone care for you? The question caught her off guard. She opened her mouth, but couldn't find words. Instead, she straightened the sheets unnecessarily and said, I'll send in the physiotherapist tomorrow morning. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. May, he said, and when she looked back, his eyes held something raw and unguarded. I'm not trying to make things harder for you. I just don't want to pretend that moment didn't happen. She swallowed hard. It has to be like it didn't. And with that, she left again. But that night she cried. Not loud, not broken sobs, just quiet tears that slipped down her cheeks as she sat in her car outside the hospital, her hands still trembling from holding herself together all day. She didn't know why she was crying. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was the way Tate looked at her, not with desire, but with understanding, like he saw right through her calm facade. She hated it. She hated how much she thought about him, how much she wanted to go back, how much she already missed the sound of his voice when he wasn't guarded. Days turned into a week. Tate's wounds healed faster than anyone expected, but his spirit seemed to dim again. The nurses whispered that he was becoming difficult, quiet, detached, refusing medication sometimes. May kept her distance, but guilt weighed heavier each day. Finally, one morning, she found herself standing outside his door again. She didn't plan to go in, but then she heard the faint sound of something shattering, glass against tile. Without thinking, she rushed inside. Tate was standing near the bed, his hand bleeding from a broken water glass. "Tate!" she exclaimed, rushing toward him. "What happened?" "I got tired of waiting," he said, voice low but strained. "For you to come back." She grabbed his wrist, checking the cut. "You could have hurt yourself worse." "Doesn't matter," he muttered. "Nothing feels right when you're not here." May looked up at him then, meeting his eyes filled with pain, confusion, and something dangerously close to love. She wanted to say something, anything, but words failed her. Instead, she wrapped his hand in gauze and whispered, "You can't keep doing this." "Then tell me how to stop," he said, his voice breaking. "Tell me how to stop thinking about you when I close my eyes." May's chest tightened. "You don't," she whispered. "You just learn to live with it." When she finished bandaging him, she turned to leave, but he caught her wrist gently. "You make it sound so easy." "It's not," she said softly. Their eyes lingered, too long, too close, before she finally pulled free and left the room again. That night, she couldn't stop thinking about what he said. Maybe he wasn't the only one learning to live with it. The hospital had its own rhythm, one that never stopped even when hearts did. Machines hummed, nurses hurried, and life moved on, indifferent to whoever was hurting inside its walls. But for May Andrews, every sound, every soft footstep down the corridor carried one name: Tate. She had spent the last few days convincing herself that keeping her distance was the right thing to do. It was ethical, professional, safe. But every time she walked past room 302, something inside her tightened, like a thread pulling her closer no matter how much she resisted. She could feel him there, the quiet, the weight of his silence, the way he seemed to draw her in without even trying. She hated that part most, because she'd worked so hard to stay untouched, unshaken, and Tate Woods had managed to undo all of that with a single kiss and a few broken words. On the 7th morning after their last encounter, May was reviewing patient files in the nurse's station when a small folded paper slid across the desk toward her. "From a man in 302, Lena said with a smirk. "You two have some kind of tension going on, huh?" May ignored the teasing, quickly tucking the paper under her clipboard. She didn't open it right away. It took her almost 2 hours in a quiet hallway before she finally did. The handwriting was messy, like someone unsure of his own steadiness. "If you're not coming back to check on me as a nurse, then come as a friend. I'm tired of talking to walls." She read it 3 times before folding it again. Friend. That word had weight, but it also offered her a small loophole, something to hide behind. That evening, she found herself standing in his room once more. Tate was by the window, dressed in a plain gray hoodie, his arms still in a sling, but his posture stronger than before. The setting sun spilled orange light across the floor, casting long shadows that stretched between them. "You shouldn't write notes to nurses," May said softly, stepping closer. "They might report you." "You didn't," he said, turning around. There was a small smile on his face, faint but real. "So, I guess you miss me." "I didn't say that," she replied quickly, trying not to return the smile. "Then why are you here?" he asked. She hesitated. "Because you asked for a friend. And maybe I need one too." His expression softened, and for a while, neither of them spoke. The silence between them wasn't awkward anymore. It was full, heavy but somehow comforting. May checked his dressing, making sure everything was healing properly, but her hands moved slower than usual. "You're recovering fast," she said, breaking the silence. "Guess that stubbornness you mentioned is working." "Guess it helps when you have someone worth proving wrong," he said. She rolled her eyes lightly. "You're impossible." "You like that," he teased. She laughed, despite herself, a sound she hadn't made in weeks. Tate leaned back on the bed, watching her. "I haven't heard that sound in so long," he said quietly. "It makes this place feel less like a hospital." "Careful," May replied, teasing him back. "You'll make me think you're flirting." "I'm not," he said, his tone dropping to something softer. "I'm just saying the truth." The truth lingered in the air, dangerous and fragile. May felt it, and she knew she should stop it before it grew into something she couldn't control. But instead, she found herself sitting down in the chair beside his bed, crossing her arms to hide the tremor in her fingers. Tell me about your work, she said quickly, changing the subject. Architecture, right? His face brightened a little. Yeah, I design homes. Or, I used to, before the accident. Haven't touched a sketch pad since. Why not? Doesn't feel right, he said. It's like the part of me that could build things died that night. May looked at him for a long moment, her chest tightening. Then maybe it's time to rebuild that part. He smiled faintly. You make it sound easy. It's not, she said softly. But healing never is. They talked for hours that evening, about everything and nothing. He told her about his childhood, the first house he ever designed, the way his fiancée used to laugh at his messy sketches. May told him about nursing school, about how she'd learned to fake calmness even when she was breaking inside. They found comfort in their shared brokenness, in the way pain became lighter when shared aloud. Over the next week, their friendship became the hospital's quiet secret. May would stop by his room after rounds, and they'd talk until her shift ended. Sometimes they joked, sometimes they just sat in silence. Once she brought him coffee, real coffee, not the bland hospital kind, and he grinned like a boy tasting joy for the first time. Careful, she'd said, handing him the cup. That smile could get you in trouble. You first, he replied. You started it. But with every passing day, the unspoken between them grew louder. It showed in the way his eyes softened when she entered, the way her hands lingered when adjusting his bandage, the way their laughter sometimes turned into silence that said more than words ever could. One evening, during another storm, Tate was trying to walk without his cane. May stood by, watching nervously. You're pushing too hard, she warned. You'll hurt yourself. I need to feel normal again, he said, taking another shaky step. Normal doesn't come back in a day. Then how long does it take? He asked, frustration cracking through his voice. She took a step closer, her tone gentler now. As long as it needs to. Healing isn't a race. He looked at her then, eyes searching hers. Then stay long enough to see me heal. May froze. Tate, please, he said softly. I know you're scared. I can see it every time you walk in here. But I'm scared too. And when you're here, it doesn't feel so heavy. Her throat tightened. She wanted to tell him that nurses weren't supposed to feel this way, that she wasn't supposed to be his reason to fight. But then he stumbled slightly, and instinctively, she reached for him. Their hands met, steadying each other. Neither of them let go. The air between them stilled, thick with everything they weren't saying. You can let go now, she whispered. Can I? He murmured. Because I don't think I want to. She should have moved, stepped back, broken the spell. Instead, she found herself looking into his eyes, her heart racing in ways she hadn't felt in years. Finally, she pulled her hand away, whispering, You should rest. You always say that when you're running away, he said quietly. She didn't reply. She turned and walked out of the room, her pulse loud in her ears. But even after she left, she couldn't stop thinking about him. The next few days blurred together, and though she tried to keep things professional, the line between care and affection had already faded. Tate began drawing again. Using a pencil, May brought him one morning. He sketched the hospital garden, the nurses, the rain against the window, and one sketch he never showed her but kept hidden in his drawer, a portrait of May, smiling. One night, May caught him staring at her while she changed his bandage. What? She asked, smiling faintly. You're staring again. I was just thinking, he said quietly, how strange it is that someone can walk into your life when you least expect it and suddenly make you want to live again. She didn't know how to answer that, so she looked away. You're getting poetic, Mr. Woods. Maybe I finally have the right muse, he replied. The words made her chest flutter, soft, dangerous, and alive. When she left his room that night, she stood by the door for a long time before walking away, whispering to herself, You're in trouble, May. Because no matter how hard she tried to deny it, it was already too late. Somewhere between his pain and her compassion, between his brokenness and her healing touch, she had started falling, quietly, completely, and without permission. And this time, she knew there was no turning back. The night shift was quieter than usual, the kind of quiet that made the walls seem closer and the air thicker. May had always liked those hours, the calm before dawn, the soft hum of machines, The way time seemed to slow down just enough for her to breathe. But tonight, she couldn't focus. Every time she passed the East Wing, she felt that same pull again. Room 302. Tate. He wasn't supposed to mean this much. Not after everything she'd promised herself when she took the job. No attachments. No blurred lines. No heartbreak. She had built her whole life around that discipline. But now it was crumbling quietly in her hands. By 10:45 p.m., the corridors were almost empty. May stood at the nurse's desk, staring at Tate's chart, pretending to review his vitals even though she knew them by heart. She told herself she'd just check on him once more before leaving, just to make sure he was asleep, just to be sure he was okay. But when she opened the door, he wasn't asleep. He was sitting by the window, hoodie half-zipped, a sketch pad open on his lap. The faint glow from the streetlight outside brushed against his jawline, outlining the quiet strength in his features. He looked up the moment she stepped in. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. "I was just making rounds," she said automatically, though there was no one left to check. He smiled faintly. "Sure, and I'm just sketching random nurses at midnight." "You're impossible," she said, shaking her head. "You said that last time. You keep proving me right." He chuckled softly, but there was something in his eyes, a weariness, a kind of sadness that didn't belong to a man his age. She crossed her arms and leaned against the wall. "What are you drawing this time?" "You," he said simply. "I was trying to get the way you look when you're thinking too hard, but I can't seem to get it right." May froze for a moment, her pulse skipping. "You shouldn't be drawing me," she said quietly. "That's crossing a line." "Maybe," he admitted, "but every time I try to draw something else, it just turns into you anyway." She tried to laugh it off, but the air between them shifted, heavy with a truth neither of them could hide anymore. She took a few steps closer, drawn in despite herself. "Let me see," she said, reaching for the sketchbook. He hesitated before handing it to her. On the page was a rough pencil drawing, her face half lit by imagined light, eyes focused, lips parted slightly as if she were about to speak. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest, raw, and full of feeling. "You made me look braver than I am," she said softly. "You are brave," he replied. "You just don't see it." Her throat tightened, and she looked away, pretending to study the drawing. "You shouldn't say things like that." "Why not?" "Because it makes it harder to remember who we're supposed to be." "And who's that?" he asked quietly. "You're my patient," she whispered. "And you're my reason for waking up," he said before he could stop himself. The words hung between them, fragile and dangerous. May's eyes met his, and for a moment, the world outside that room disappeared. She could hear her own heartbeat, could feel every inch of distance between them stretch and collapse all at once. "Tate," she breathed. "Don't." "I can't help it," he said, standing slowly. "I've tried. Believe me, I have. But every time you walk in here, everything feels different. Better." "You don't mean that," she said, her voice trembling. "You're just grateful. That's all." "Grateful?" He stepped closer. "No. Grateful is when someone brings you soup. This is something else." She took a step back, but her back met the wall. He stopped, giving her space, his voice low but steady. "You told me healing takes time. Maybe it does. But what if you're part of my healing?" "That's not how it works," she said, her breath catching. "I'm supposed to help you get better, not what?" "Not feel this," she said, her voice barely audible. "Not want something I can't have." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then he said softly, "What if it's not about wanting? What if it's about finding something real when you've stopped believing you could?" The honesty in his tone broke something inside her. For the first time in years, she let herself feel it, the warmth, the fear, the ache she'd kept buried. "You should rest," she whispered again, but the words sounded weak, hollow. "May," he said gently, "look at me." Against her better judgment, she did. His eyes were tired but alive, full of something that made her chest tighten. "You deserve to be seen too," he said. "Not just as the nurse who saves everyone, but as the woman who feels, who cares, who's allowed to want more." That was all it took. The wall she'd built began to crack. She took a shaky breath, her voice barely steady. "You don't know me, Tate." "Then let me," he said simply. "Let me try." She wanted to say no. She wanted to turn around, to walk out, to protect herself from the heartbreak she knew was waiting. But instead, she found herself whispering, "You'll forget me when you leave this place." "Then don't let me leave without you," he replied. She shook her head, fighting tears that burned at the corners of her eyes. "You don't mean that." "I do." Silence filled the room, heavy and trembling. He took one step closer, slow enough to give her time to stop him. She didn't. When his hand reached up to brush a strand of hair from her face, her eyes fluttered shut. His fingers lingered just a second too long. The space between them vanished, and before either of them could think, he leaned in and kissed her, soft at first, hesitant, like a question waiting for an answer. She froze, breath catching, heart pounding. Every rule she'd sworn to keep shattered in that moment. But then her hands found his shirt, and she kissed him back, not out of impulse, but out of every buried feeling she'd been too afraid to face. It was gentle, real, and terrifying. When they finally pulled apart, neither could speak. "That shouldn't have happened," she whispered. "I know," he said, voice low, "but I don't regret it." "You should. Do you?" Her silence was the answer. She turned away, gripping the edge of the window frame to steady herself. "This changes everything," she murmured. "It doesn't have to," he said softly. "It already has," she replied, finally looking back at him. "You have no idea what this could cost me." "Then let me make it worth it," he said. "Let me try." She didn't answer. She just stood there, caught between duty and desire, between who she was and who she could be with him. For a long time, neither of them moved. The storm outside had stopped, leaving behind only the faint patter of water against glass. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but steady. "Get some rest, Tate," she said, turning toward the door. "Please, will you come back tomorrow?" he asked. She hesitated, her hand on the doorknob. "I don't know," she said truthfully. And then she left, her heart aching, her lips still trembling from the memory of his touch. That night, sleep never came. Every time she closed her eyes, she could still feel his breath against her skin, still hear his voice saying things she wasn't supposed to want to believe. And somewhere deep down, beneath all the guilt and fear, was something else, something she couldn't quite silence. Hope. Morning came slower than usual, stretching painfully into the kind of silence that felt heavier than words. May had barely slept. Her pillow still smelled faintly of antiseptic from work, and every time she turned, her thoughts circled back to the same place, his lips, his eyes, that moment she swore would never happen. By sunrise, she decided. She had to pull away. Whatever that was, whatever had happened between them, it couldn't continue. Not her world. Not with everything she'd built on discipline and control. By the time she got to the hospital, her resolve was wrapped tight like armor. She kept her head down during the morning briefing, avoided room 302 on her rounds, and ignored the flutter in her chest each time she passed his hallway. But by late afternoon, fate, or something cruelly close to it, had other plans. Lena, the other nurse, walked up to her with a folder. "May, Dr. Levine wants you to check Tate Wood's mobility progress. He's up for discharge evaluation next week." May froze for a second too long. "Me? Yeah, you've been handling his case the longest. He asked for you specifically, right?" she said, forcing a neutral tone. "I'll check on him after rounds." Her stomach twisted. She told herself it was just another patient review, nothing more. But the moment she entered his room, all the air she'd rehearsed to breathe properly vanished. He was by the window again, sunlight falling across his face. His arm was still wrapped, but healing. A few sketches lay scattered across the side table. He looked up immediately. "You weren't here yesterday," he said quietly. "I had a busy shift." "No, you didn't," he said, reading her too easily. "You were avoiding me. You kissed me," she replied before she could stop herself. The words hit the air, sharper than intended. Tate flinched slightly, but didn't look away. "I know," he said, "and if I could take it back, I wouldn't." "You should," she said firmly, "because that moment, it wasn't real. You're confused, vulnerable, emotional. Patients sometimes fall for the people who save them," he interrupted softly. "That's not what this is, May. I've been hurt before. I know what confusion feels like. This isn't it." She shook her head, crossing her arms to keep them from shaking. You're getting discharged soon. Let's just focus on your recovery. You think leaving this place will make me forget you? It should, but it won't, he said quietly. She sighed, running a hand through her hair. Tate, please don't make this harder. Harder for who? He asked. For you or for me? For both of us, she said, her voice cracking. You have a life waiting outside these walls. You'll heal, you'll go back to your designs, and you'll move on. That's how it should be. And you, he asked softly, what happens to you? I keep doing my job, she said, and pretend none of this happened. Exactly. The silence that followed was thick, like something neither of them could cut through. Tate finally looked away, his jaw tight. You're really good at that, he said, at walking away from what feels real. It's called being responsible, she replied, though her voice was barely steady. He didn't argue. Instead, he turned back to the window, his reflection faint in the glass. You know, he said after a while, the night before the accident, I told myself I'd stop believing in anything lasting. My engagement had ended, my work felt meaningless, and I didn't care if I saw another day. Then I woke up here, and you were the first person I saw. May looked at him, her throat tightening. Don't do this. You smiled at me, he continued, even when I was angry, even when I said things I didn't mean. You didn't give up on me, and now you're telling me that none of it matters? It can't, she said quietly. Not if I want to keep doing what I love. He turned back to her, his voice lower now. What if what you love is right in front of you? She blinked back tears. You think this is love? I don't know what else to call it, he said. It's the first thing that's made me feel alive in months. You're just scared, she whispered. You're holding on to the person who helped you survive. And you're running from the person who sees you, he said. The words hit her like a pulse. She wanted to scream that he was wrong, but she couldn't, because somewhere inside, she knew he wasn't. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. May, wait, he said. Before you walk out that door, tell me, do you really feel nothing? She closed her eyes, her breath shaking. It doesn't matter what I feel. It matters to me. Then you're not ready to heal, she said, her voice trembling. Because healing means letting go. She left before he could answer, her chest burning. The rest of her shift felt endless. Every beep of the monitors, every patient's voice, every step down the hallway felt like a punishment. When she finally got home, she dropped her bag and sat on the floor, hands covering her face. The quiet apartment suddenly felt unbearable. She remembered his voice, calm, broken, pleading, and the way his eyes had looked when he said her name. She tried to drown it out with music, with tea, with anything, but nothing worked. Her phone buzzed once, lighting up with an unknown number. She hesitated, then opened it. You can lie to yourself all you want, May, but you can't unfeel what happened. She didn't reply. She deleted the message, turned off her phone, and went to the bathroom to splash her face with cold water. But when she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. The calm, composed nurse everyone knew was gone. In her place was a woman torn between right and real. For the next few days, she kept her distance, but the hospital made it impossible to truly escape him. She saw him in the hallways during physio, walking slower but stronger. He always greeted her with a quiet nod, and she'd force a polite smile before looking away. But every glance felt like a memory, like that kiss hadn't ended at all, just paused. By the time Friday came, news spread that Tate would be discharged on Monday. Everyone seemed happy for him, except May. She should have been proud. She'd helped him heal, helped him stand again. But all she felt was an ache she couldn't name. That evening, while she was reviewing reports in the empty nurse's station, Lena approached her again. You okay? Fine, May said automatically. You sure? You've been weird lately. Like, more serious than usual. Just tired, she said with a forced smile. Lena said, unconvinced. Well, your miracle patient left you something. May frowned. What? Lena handed her a small brown envelope. He said to give it to you before he checks out. May stared at it for a long time after Lena walked away. Her hand shook as she opened it. Inside was a folded sketch, one she hadn't seen before. It was of a woman standing at a hospital window, sunlight pouring over her, looking out like she was waiting for something she'd never admit she wanted. At the bottom, in neat handwriting, were the words, "You told me healing takes time. I just didn't know it would take losing you." Her eyes stung, and before she knew it, tears blurred the drawing. She pressed it against her chest, whispering to herself, "What have I done?" That night, she couldn't stop thinking about him, about how he'd looked at her the first day, about the way his voice softened when he said her name. Somewhere deep down, beneath all her guilt and denial, she knew it wasn't over. Not yet. The morning of Tate's discharge arrived with sunlight too bright for May's tired eyes. She'd barely slept again, and her hands trembled as she arranged files on the nurse's station, pretending to focus. The whole ward felt different that day, lighter, quieter, as if everyone sensed that someone who'd lingered in pain for too long was finally leaving. Everyone except her. When she walked past room 302, the bed was neatly made, sheets folded, the faint smell of disinfectant replacing the familiar trace of him. Her chest tightened. It was over. He was gone. She had done her job. That was supposed to be the end of it. But somehow, it didn't feel like an ending at all. It felt like an open wound. At lunch, Lena was scrolling through her phone, chatting about plans. "You hear about Woods?" she asked casually. "Discharged this morning. Gave everyone chocolates before he left. Handsome and generous. Men like that should be illegal." May forced a smile. "Yeah, I heard. You okay?" Lena asked, studying her. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Just tired," May said, pushing her tray away. But deep inside, something gnawed at her. A quiet ache she couldn't explain. She told herself she'd forget soon. She'd done it before. She'd buried heartbreaks, silenced emotions, hidden tears behind professionalism. She could do it again. Days passed. The hospital returned to its usual rhythm. New patients came, new stories unfolded. But no matter how much she tried to drown herself in work, she still caught herself glancing toward room 302, half expecting to find him there. Every time she wrote the number on a chart, her pulse skipped. Every time she passed the window by the east wing, she remembered his voice, his laugh, that sketch he'd left behind. Then, one Saturday afternoon, fate decided to test her. May had agreed to meet a friend for coffee near the park. It was one of those slow weekends when the world seemed too peaceful for its own good. She was halfway through her latte when a familiar voice broke through the buzz of conversation. "May." Her stomach dropped. She turned, and there he was. Tate, dressed simply in jeans and a navy shirt, a soft breeze tugging at his hair. He looked healthier, brighter. The sling was gone, replaced by confidence in his stance, though she could still see faint traces of healing in his movements. "Wow," she said, standing slowly. "You didn't disappear forever," he finished with a half-smile. "Guess I'm bad at goodbyes." She laughed nervously. "I wasn't expecting to see you here." "I wasn't expecting to either," he said. "But the coffee shop's near my therapist's office. Thought I'd reward myself for not canceling my session." "That's good," she said. "I'm glad you're keeping up with it." "You sound like my nurse again," he teased lightly. "Sorry, habit." "Don't be. I miss that tone." They both fell quiet for a second, unsure what came next. She gestured to the seat across from her. "Do you want to sit?" "Yeah," he said quickly, slipping into the chair. The air between them was charged, but softer than before, touched with something like relief. For a while, they talked about safe things, his progress, her work, the weather. But eventually, their small talk faded into the truth they'd been avoiding. "So," she said, tracing the rim of her cup, "how's life outside the hospital?" "Loud," he said. "Bright. A bit lonely sometimes." "Lonely? You get used to hearing one voice every day," he said quietly. Then suddenly it's gone. May looked away, her throat tight. "I told you we couldn't. I know what you told me," he interrupted gently. "But I also know what I felt, and what I still feel." "Tate, no, listen," he said, leaning forward slightly. "I'm not here to make you uncomfortable. I just needed you to know that meeting you didn't feel like some passing moment. It changed things for me." "You're grateful," she said softly. "You keep calling it that," he said, shaking his head. "But it's more than gratitude, May. It's like," he paused, searching for the right words. "It's like you reminded me that I could feel again, that I could want something good without expecting it to break me." Her eyes met his, and the world seemed to slow. He looked at her the way he always did, steady, patient, seeing past her walls. "You shouldn't say things like that," she whispered. "Why not?" "Because it makes me want to believe you." "Maybe you should." Her breath caught. "You don't understand. If anyone at the hospital knew what happened, they won't," he said quietly. "And even if they did, it doesn't erase what was real. It doesn't make it right either." "Maybe not," he admitted, "but sometimes the right thing and the real thing aren't the same." She stared at him, torn between everything she wanted to feel and everything she'd sworn to resist. Finally, she exhaled shakily. "You look better," she said, changing the subject. "Stronger." "Because of you," he said. "Don't say that. It's true. You gave me a reason to fight when I didn't care if I survived." "You fought for yourself," she said, her voice trembling. "I just happened to be there." "No, May. You were the reason I tried." There was again the honesty in his tone, the kind that didn't ask for permission. She felt tears sting her eyes, but she blinked them away. "I'm glad you're okay," she whispered. "I really am." "That sounds like a goodbye," he said quietly. "Maybe it is. And what if I'm not ready for one? Then I hope you'll understand why I have to be." He nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "You always did run when things got too real. And you always pushed when you shouldn't," she replied softly. "Maybe that's why we worked," he said, half smiling, even if it was for a moment. The silence between them felt final this time. She stood up first, clutching her bag. "Take care of yourself, Tate." "You too, May." She turned to leave, but he called her name one last time. She stopped. "What?" "If you ever change your mind," he said, his voice low but certain, "I'll still be right here. Not waiting, just hoping." She didn't answer. She just nodded, forcing herself to walk away. Every step felt heavier than the last. When she reached the street, she finally let the tears fall. She leaned against a wall, breathing hard, the city's noise blurring around her. That was supposed to be closure, but closure didn't feel like this. It didn't ache, didn't leave a hole that deepened with every heartbeat. That night, she placed the sketch he'd drawn of her on her nightstand. For the first time, she didn't hide it away. She sat beside it, tracing the pencil lines with her fingers. Somewhere between his pain and her fear, they had found something real. Maybe forbidden, maybe fleeting, but real. And though she couldn't name it aloud, she could feel it, a quiet truth sitting in her chest. Sometimes love wasn't about forever. Sometimes it was about finding someone who reminded you that you could feel again. And that night, as rain began to fall softly against her window, May whispered into the quiet, "I miss you too." Weeks melted into months, but time did little to quiet the echo of Tate's voice in May's mind. She had returned to her routine, to long shifts and sleepless nights, to the comforting rhythm of machines that beeped with predictable precision. Yet inside, nothing felt steady anymore. Every patient with brown eyes reminded her of him. Every slow smile felt like an echo of one she'd already lost. Her colleagues thought she was just tired, another nurse drowning under the weight of hospital life. They didn't know she was fighting memories that refused to let her go. Then one evening, as the hospital hummed under the muted light of dusk, May received a call that cracked the fragile calm she'd been clinging to. It was from her younger sister, Ella, her voice trembling. "May, it's Dad. He collapsed. They're transferring him to City General." The words hit like a punch. Without thinking, she grabbed her bag, her keys, and ran. When she arrived, the world blurred into chaos. Doctors rushing, voices overlapping, the smell of antiseptic sharp in her nose. She hated being on the other side of it, hated not being the calm professional with a chart in hand. Now she was just a daughter, terrified. The doctor's words came in fragments. "Stroke, stable for now, under observation." May nodded numbly, barely processing. When she was finally allowed into his room, her father looked small against the sheets, tubes running across his arms. He'd always been strong, stern, unshakable. Seeing him like that broke something inside her. She stayed for days, refusing to leave, barely eating, barely speaking. Her colleagues offered to cover her shifts. She couldn't think about work. She couldn't think about anything but the rhythmic beep of her father's heart monitor. On the third night, when she stepped out to get some air, her eyes caught someone familiar down the hall. Broad shoulders, calm stride, that unmistakable quiet confidence. Tate. For a moment, she thought exhaustion was playing tricks on her. But when he turned, surprise flickered in his eyes. "May," he said softly, "what are you doing here?" "My dad," she managed to say. "He had a stroke." Concern filled his face immediately. "I'm so sorry. How's he doing?" "They said he's stable," she whispered. I can't leave." He hesitated, then stepped closer, his voice gentle. "You shouldn't be alone right now." "I'm not," she lied. "Ella's here." "And where is she?" "Sleeping in the waiting room." "Then you're alone," he said, matter-of-factly. She sighed, too tired to argue. "Why are you here, Tate?" "Therapy check-in," he said. "Same building. I come every 2 weeks." He paused, then added, "I didn't think I'd see you again." "Neither did I," she said. "Guess fate didn't get the memo." He smiled faintly, but his tone softened. "Can I stay with you for a bit? Just until you're ready to go back in." She should have said no. She should have told him that this was neither the time nor the place. But the truth was, she needed someone who didn't ask her to be strong. She nodded silently, and they sat together on the bench outside the ward. The silence between them wasn't awkward this time. It was heavy, but comforting. After a while, he said quietly, "You always take care of everyone." "Who takes care of you?" She gave a small, humorless laugh. "Coffee. And maybe bad music. You deserve better than that." "Don't start, Tate." "I'm serious. You carry too much. I can handle it." "You shouldn't have to." His words slipped under her defenses, gentle but relentless. She turned to him, tired eyes meeting his. "Why do you keep doing that?" "Doing what?" "Caring when you shouldn't." "Because I don't know how to stop," he said simply. "I try, May. I really did. But every time I think I've moved on, something reminds me of you. The way you talk, the way you fight through everything like you're allergic to weakness. You make it hard to forget." Her heart thudded painfully in her chest. "Don't say that," she whispered. "You think it's easy for me?" "I don't know what to think anymore," he admitted. "But I know I'm here. And I still mean it, everything I said the last time." "You shouldn't," she murmured. "You should find someone uncomplicated." "I don't want uncomplicated." Something broke in her then, not completely, but enough to let the truth slip through. "I haven't stopped thinking about you either," she said softly. "I told myself it was just guilt or habit or pity, but it's not. It's something I can't seem to switch off." He exhaled slowly, relief flashing across his face. Then stopped trying to. "It's not that simple." "It never is," he said. "But we're both here now. Maybe that means something." Before she could reply, Ella's voice called her from inside. May stood quickly. "I have to go." "Of course," Tate said, standing too. "I'll be around." She gave him a long look, one filled with unspoken things, and disappeared into the ward. The next few days blurred together again, tests, updates, exhaustion. But somehow, Tate kept showing up, sometimes with coffee, sometimes just to sit quietly near the vending machine while she stared into space. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't push. He just existed beside her, steady and patient, until she began to rely on the sound of his footsteps approaching. One night, as they walked out together into the hospital courtyard, May said, "You shouldn't keep doing this. You have your own life. Maybe this is part of it," he said. "Maybe my life's better when you're in it." She looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in months, she didn't feel like running. "You always know what to say," she murmured. "Only when I mean it," he replied. There was a long pause, the kind that hums between two people standing too close. And then, without overthinking, May took a step forward and rested her head against his chest. It was quiet there, warm, safe. His arms came around her slowly, as if afraid she'd vanish if he moved too fast. For the first time, she didn't pull away. They stayed like that for a long time, the world fading around them. It wasn't about passion or rebellion or the thrill of breaking rules. It was about finding peace in someone's presence, even when everything else felt uncertain. When she finally lifted her head, her voice was barely a whisper. "You should go home." "So should you," he said. "But you won't." "Maybe not. Then neither will I." She smiled faintly through the exhaustion. "You're stubborn." "You like that about me," he said. Maybe I do. As the night stretched on, they sat on the bench together again, watching the sky shift from dark to pale gray. She realized something quietly then. Love didn't always arrive when it was convenient or proper. Sometimes it came disguised as comfort, persistence, and quiet loyalty. Sometimes it was the person who refused to leave even when you gave them every reason to. When morning came, her father woke up for the first time in days. May was by his side instantly, tears spilling down her face as he managed a weak smile. Tate stood at the doorway, unseen but there, watching her with quiet pride before stepping back to give her space. Later that day, when she went searching for him, he was gone. Only a small paper cup of coffee sat on the bench where he'd waited all night, with a note tucked beneath it. For the days you can't take care of yourself, I'll always be somewhere near. She read it 3 times before pressing it to her chest, smiling through her tears. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel alone. Days turned into weeks, and May's father grew stronger with every sunrise. His speech returned in fragments, his humor resurfacing in soft chuckles that reminded May of childhood mornings before life became complicated. The doctors called it progress. May called it grace. But even as relief filled her heart, something else grew quietly inside her, a restlessness she couldn't name. Tate hadn't come around since that morning she found his note. She told herself it was for the best, that maybe distance was what they both needed to reset. Yet every time she passed the bench outside the hospital, her eyes searched for him like a habit she couldn't break. She'd reread his note too many times, the ink beginning to fade where her fingers had traced the words. For the days you can't take care of yourself, I'll always be somewhere near. He'd meant it. She knew he had, but now he was nowhere. Her father noticed her distraction one evening as she adjusted his pillows. You look like your mother when she's hiding something, he said quietly. May froze. I'm not hiding anything. Then why do your eyes look like that? Like what? Like you're waiting for someone to walk through that door. She tried to laugh it off, but he smiled knowingly, that old father's intuition lighting his face. Who is he? Dad, don't even start. I may be recovering, but I'm not blind. There's a man in that head of yours. May sighed, sinking into the chair beside his bed. He's just someone I met at work. A patient. Yes. And nothing, she said too quickly. He was hurt. I helped him. That's all. Her father studied her for a long time before speaking. You know, your mother once told me love doesn't ask for permission. It just happens. The trick is deciding whether it's worth fighting for. It's complicated, May said. Everything worth it usually is, he replied. That night, her father's words wouldn't leave her alone. Love doesn't ask for permission. Maybe that was true. Maybe it had already happened, quietly, while she was too busy convincing herself it shouldn't. The following week, she finally returned to work. Walking through the hospital felt strange, familiar yet different, like a place that had aged in her absence. The corridors smelled the same. The nurses greeted her the same, but her heart wasn't the same. She went through her rounds mechanically, checking charts, adjusting IVs, offering calm smiles. Yet every time she passed room 214, his old room, her steps faltered. Late one evening, after most of the staff had gone home, she found herself sitting in that room. The bed was empty now, sheets crisp and untouched, machine silent. She traced her fingers along the edge of the bedside table, remembering the nights she'd sat there watching over him, pretending it was just duty when it was already something more. You really messed me up, Tate Woods, she whispered into the emptiness. When she left the hospital that night, the city air felt cold against her skin. She walked to the parking lot, keys in hand, but stopped when she saw a familiar silhouette leaning against a car under the dim glow of the streetlight. Her breath caught. Tate turned slowly, eyes locking on hers. For a second, neither moved. I wasn't sure if you'd still recognize me, he said quietly. She stared at him, heart pounding. How could I not? He gave a small, uncertain smile. I didn't mean to disappear. I thought maybe you needed space. You're going through so much. I didn't need space, she said, stepping closer. But I also needed you. The honesty in her own voice startled her. Tate blinked, his jaw tightening as though trying to keep his emotions in check. "You have no idea how many times I came here and didn't walk in," he said. "I just stand out here, hoping maybe I'd catch a glimpse of you leaving. Why didn't you?" "Because every time I told myself I'd moved on, I saw your face in my head again. And I knew I was lying." May's throat tightened. "I tried to forget you too," she admitted. "But I couldn't. You were there in every quiet moment, in every patient I helped, in every heartbeat I heard through a stethoscope. It's ridiculous." "It's real," he said softly. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Two people who had spent too long pretending they didn't feel what was already written all over their faces. Tate took a slow step forward, then another, until he was standing inches away. "I know you think we don't make sense," he said. "Maybe we don't. But I've been broken before, May, and somehow you made me want to heal. I don't care if it's messy or complicated or too soon. I just know that when you're near, the noise in my head gets quiet." Her breath hitched. "You always know what to say." "Because I mean every word," he said. "So tell me to leave, and I will. But if you want me to stay, just say it once." The night seemed to hold its breath with her. She could hear her father's voice in her mind. Love doesn't ask for permission. Maybe it didn't. Maybe this was what it looked like, scary and raw and terrifyingly beautiful. "Stay," she whispered. Tate exhaled shakily, relief flooding his face. He reached up, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek, his fingers trembling. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "For once I am." He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, but she didn't. When their lips met, it wasn't the desperate kind of kiss that belonged to hospital rooms or grief. It was quiet, steady, a promise written in touch instead of words. When they finally broke apart, May rested her forehead against his chest, eyes closed. "You still make me feel like I'm breaking the rules," she murmured. "Then let's write new ones," he said. They stood like that for a long time under the dim streetlight. Two souls who had been through too much to still believe in fairy tales, but somehow found something better, something real. Over the next weeks, life slowly found a new rhythm. May returned to her shifts, and Tate continued his therapy. Some nights they'd meet at a small diner near the hospital, sharing quiet conversations over coffee. Other nights he'd walk her home, their fingers brushing but never quite holding. It wasn't perfect. Nothing about it was, but it was honest. One evening, after another long day, May walked into the diner to find him waiting with 2 cups of tea instead of coffee. "What's this?" she asked, smiling. "Decaf," he said. "You've had enough caffeine to keep a small country awake." She laughed. "You're not wrong." He watched her for a moment, then said softly, "You know, I used to think the hospital saved me. But now I know it was you." May shook her head. "No, Tate. You save yourself. I just handed you the bandages." He smiled. "Then I guess you'll have to stay around to make sure they don't fall off." "Maybe I will," she said. And as they sat there, hands finally intertwining across the table, May realized something simple but profound. Healing wasn't just for the body. It was for the heart, too. And sometimes, love didn't arrive in grand gestures or perfect timing. Sometimes it came quietly, through care, through patience, through the courage to stay. For May Andrews and Tate Woods, it had started with a kiss, but somewhere along the way, it became everything they never planned and everything they didn't know they needed. A month later, the hospital air felt heavier. Not because of sickness or sorrow, but because whispers had started to spread, whispers about May and Tate. A nurse had seen them together at the diner. Another had spotted him waiting for her after her shift. The hospital was a world where rumors traveled faster than ambulances, and soon enough, the gossip reached the head nurse. May had always been the quiet one, reliable and professional, the kind of nurse others admired. But now, people looked at her differently, with curiosity, with judgment. She could feel it in every hallway, every hushed voice that stopped when she walked by. One afternoon, she was called into the director's office. The glass walls reflected the sterile white light, making the room feel too bright, too exposing. "May," said Director Holden, folding her hands on the desk, "I've received concerning reports." May stood stiffly, her palms slightly damp. "Reports about what?" "About you and a former patient." Tate Woods. May's heartbeat stuttered. He's no longer under my care. That's not the point. You understand the ethics involved in this, don't you? You could lose your license if this escalates. We didn't do anything unethical, May said quietly. Our relationship started after he was discharged. May, Holden said, her tone softening but her expression stern. You know perception matters here. Even if nothing happened during his treatment, people will assume it did. You're one of my best nurses. I don't want this to ruin you. May felt something twist painfully in her chest. So what are you saying? I'm saying you need to make a choice. Either end it, or be prepared for the consequences. That night, May drove home with trembling hands. Her phone buzzed with a message from Tate. Dinner at the usual spot? I've got news. She didn't reply right away. She sat in her car, staring at the steering wheel, fighting tears. It wasn't fair. He had healed. She had done her job. But love had crossed that invisible line, and now she was paying the price. When she finally arrived at the diner, Tate was already there, smiling the way he always did when he saw her, soft, sincere, completely unaware of the storm she carried in her chest. You look tired, he said, reaching for her hand. Rough day. She forced a small smile. Something like that. Well, I might have something to cheer you up, he said. My firm called. They want me back on site next week. It's just part-time for now, but it's something. She smiled for real then. That's amazing, Tate. Yeah, I couldn't have done it without you. Don't give me credit for your strength. Then let's split it, he said playfully. Half yours, half mine. But her heart wasn't light. His words only deepened the ache. He noticed the distant look in her eyes. May, he said, voice low, what's wrong? She hesitated, then said it softly. They found out. He blinked. Who? The hospital. The director called me in today. His jaw tightened. What did she say? That I could lose my license if this continues. The silence between them thickened. So what are you saying? He asked carefully. That we should stop? I don't know, she whispered. I love my job, Tate. I've worked too hard to lose it over something that people won't even try to understand. He leaned back, eyes shadowed. Something? Is that what this is to you? You know it's not. Then fight for it. For us. It's not that simple. It never is, he said, echoing her own words from weeks ago. But you once told me not to run from what feels real. And you once promised you wouldn't make me choose. His face fell. I'm not trying to. Then what are you doing? Trying to hold on before everything we built slips away. Her throat tightened. I just need time to think. Time, he said bitterly. Or distance. She didn't answer. And that silence was all the answer he needed. He stood up, leaving money on the table. When you figure it out, he said quietly, you know where to find me. May watched him walk out into the night, her chest burning as if she'd swallowed the sun. Days passed. She threw herself into work, but the joy was gone. Even her father noticed. You're quieter, he said one morning as she adjusted his breakfast tray. You used to hum when you worked around the house. Haven't heard that in a while. I've just been tired, she said. He studied her for a moment. It's about him, isn't it? She didn't answer. May, when I met your mother, I almost lost my job too, he said suddenly. We worked at the same firm. The company had a policy against employees dating. You know what I told them when they found out? She looked up surprised. What? That I'd rather start over than lose the one person who made me feel alive. And what happened? They fired me, he said, smiling faintly. Best thing that ever happened. 2 years later, we started our own business together. May stared at him, speechless. You're saying I should risk everything? I'm saying some things are worth the risk. You'll know if this is one of them. That night, May sat alone in her apartment, staring at her phone. She typed and deleted messages over and over. Finally, she whispered aloud, if I don't do this now, I'll regret it. She grabbed her coat and left. Tate's apartment was across town. By the time she arrived, the street was quiet, the kind of silence that holds its breath. She knocked, heart pounding. When he opened the door, surprise crossed his face, followed by something softer. May, he breathed. What are you doing here? I'm done running, she said. You were right. I can't fix people if I'm breaking myself in the process. I want to be with you, even if it costs me. Are you sure? He asked. Because once we cross that line, there's no pretending it never happened. I'm already past pretending. He didn't say anything more. He just stepped forward and pulled her into his arms, holding her like someone who'd been waiting for permission to breathe again. The world outside didn't matter. The rules didn't matter. All that mattered was that they had found their way back to each other, against reason, against fear, against everything that said they shouldn't. When they finally pulled apart, she smiled through tears. "My father told me something today," she said. "That love doesn't ask for permission." Tate smiled, brushing his thumb across her cheek. "Then let's stop asking." And that night, for the first time, May stopped being Nurse Andrews, the careful, rule-bound woman who lived by duty. She was just May, the woman who had fallen for a patient, broken the rules, and found something she couldn't deny anymore. Outside, the city lights glowed through the rain, soft and blurred, as if the whole world had decided to forgive them. The morning after felt like a dream balanced between calm and consequence. May woke up before dawn, the faint light spilling through the curtains and painting soft lines across Tate's sleeping face. He looked peaceful, more than she had ever seen him. For a few seconds, she allowed herself to simply watch him breathe, to memorize the quiet rise and fall of his chest, to imagine that this moment could last forever. But forever was a fragile thing, especially when reality waited outside the door. She slipped out of bed gently, pulling on her sweater, her mind already spinning. Her phone buzzed. A message from her supervisor. "Director Holden wants to see you at 9 a.m. May closed her eyes. She had expected this. The storm was here. She made coffee, her hands trembling slightly as the machine hummed. Tate stirred, sitting up, eyes soft but alert. "You're up early," he murmured. "Or maybe I just slept in." She turned, forcing a smile. "They called me in." "The hospital?" She nodded. "Holden wants to talk. About us." "Probably." "May." He ran a hand through his hair. "If they make this ugly, I don't want you taking all the blame." "You didn't force me into this," she said, setting his cup on the table. "I knew what I was doing." "Then let me go with you." "You can't." "Why not?" "Because this is my fight, Tate." "It's our fight," he said, standing. "You said it yourself last night. We stopped asking for permission. That means we face whatever comes together." She wanted to argue, but the steadiness in his eyes silenced her. There was something reassuring about him. He was no longer the fragile man she once cared for. He was whole now, and in that wholeness he was strong enough to stand beside her. By 9 a.m., they were in the director's office. Holden looked up from her desk, her gaze sharp, her tone clipped. "Mr. Woods," she said, clearly surprised. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I asked to come," he said, "because whatever this is about, it involves both of us." Holden sighed, removing her glasses. "May, you're one of the best nurses I've worked with. That's why this hurts. You know our policy on relationships with former patients exists for a reason." "I understand," May said quietly, "but with all due respect, our relationship didn't start until after his discharge. I followed every rule until he walked out those doors." "Intentions don't always matter when perception can harm reputation," Holden replied. "If the board decides to review this, it could result in suspension or termination." May straightened. "Then I'll take responsibility for that." Tate spoke up immediately. "No, if anyone's to blame, it's me. I kept coming around. I pursued her." "Stop," May said, turning to him. "You didn't make me love you." Holden raised a brow. "So, you're confirming this relationship?" May hesitated for half a second, then lifted her chin. "Yes." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Holden finally leaned back, exhaling. "I appreciate your honesty. I'll report this to the board, but I'll also include my personal recommendation that no disciplinary action be taken. You've both handled this with more integrity than most." May blinked in surprise. "You're not firing me?" "Not yet," Holden said, "but I'd suggest you consider taking some personal time. Let things cool off before you return." When they walked out of the office, the tension in May's chest finally loosened. Tate reached for her hand. "See," he said softly, "sometimes the world doesn't end." "Not today," she said, smiling faintly. "But it was close. Worth it. Every second." They spent the rest of the day walking through the city. No hospital walls, no whispers, just them. They stopped at a bookstore, where May browsed quietly while Tate picked out a novel he thought she'd like. Later, they sat by the river, the wind gentle against their faces. For once, there was no rush to fill the silence. Do you ever think about how strange this all is? May asked, if I hadn't been on that shift, if your car hadn't crashed, we'd have never met. Maybe, Tate said, or maybe fate's just impatient sometimes. She laughed softly. You really believe in that? I believe in second chances, he said. And in you. Her chest warmed at his words. She leaned her head on his shoulder, and for the first time in years, she felt like she wasn't waiting for life to begin. It already had. Weeks passed, and May's leave became an unexpected blessing. She spent more time with her father, helped him through his final therapy sessions, watched him start walking without assistance. He'd tease her occasionally about her architect boyfriend and how she glowed when he texted, but he was happy, and in a quiet way, so was she. One evening, Tate invited her to the site where his firm was rebuilding a community center, the same one he'd been working on before the accident. The sun was setting, casting golden light over half-finished walls and scaffolding. Looks different when it's standing, he said. Last time I saw it, it was just sketches. It's beautiful, May said, like a second beginning. That's what it feels like, he replied. Everything I thought I lost is slowly coming back. Except now it feels better because you're in it. She turned to look at him, eyes soft. You really think we'll be okay? I don't think, he said. I know. They stood there for a long time, the wind tugging gently at May's hair, the world around them humming with the quiet noise of rebuilding. She thought about all they had gone through, the hospital lights, the fear, the distance, the risks, and how every hardship had led them here. Maybe love wasn't about fairy tales or perfection. Maybe it was about showing up, staying when it was hard, and choosing each other even when it didn't make sense. Later that night, when they drove back to her apartment, Tate parked outside and turned to her. May, do you ever regret it? Breaking the rules for me. She smiled. No. If anything, I regret not doing it sooner. He laughed softly. You sure you're not going to get tired of me? I'm a nurse, Tate. I've seen people at their worst. I think I can handle you. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. You're something else, you know that? So are you, she said. But together, we make sense. He leaned in and kissed her gently. No urgency, no fear, just quiet certainty. The kind of kiss that didn't need to prove anything. The kind that said, we made it. And maybe they had. Because sometimes love doesn't come with warning signs or perfect timing. Sometimes it finds you when you least expect it, between the hum of hospital machines, between broken pieces, between rules and risk. May Andrews had spent years saving others, but in the end, it was love that saved her. And as for Tate Woods, he had come to the hospital to heal his body, but left with something far deeper, his heart restored, his life remade. When the city lights shimmered through the windshield, he whispered, from one kiss to forever, right? May smiled, her eyes glistening. A love story I never planned, she said, but I wouldn't change a thing. And in that quiet night, with their fingers intertwined, forever didn't seem like a dream anymore. It felt real.